Hello everyone, good evening and welcome to 59th session of ELTAI webinar on using the backwards design instructional framework. We would like to start the session by playing an introductory video about ELTAI. Here it is. Thank you for watching the video. Now I hand over the session to the moderator, Dr. Lalitha Bai.
Good evening, everyone. I deem it a privilege to introduce the speaker of today's session, Dr. Sonali Bhattacharya. Dr. Sonali Bhattacharya is an English language communication and soft skills consultant, teacher, educator, and content developer. She has been conducting teacher development workshops for Oxford University Press India for 12 years and is a certified trainer for Oxford Teachers Academy under the Department of Continuing Education, Oxford University, UK. She is a training consultant for British Council India and is also a presenter and trainer for the Cambridge Assessment Teacher Support Programs in India, organized by Cambridge University. She was a teacher trainer for the English Access Micro Scholarship Program, an international program conducted by the US Department of State, United States of America, and for the Fulbright Nehru English Teaching Assistantship Program conducted by USIEF. In addition, she has been conducting pre-placement soft skills and competency building trainings for undergraduate and postgraduate students in multiple universities. Today, she will be delivering her lecture on using the backwards design instructional framework. We welcome you, ma'am, for today's evening session. Over to Dr. Sonali, ma'am, now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Good afternoon, all my friends and colleagues, my respected seniors out there. So happy to have you here today and for inviting me over, ELTAI. Thank you very much. It is indeed a unique session for me because so far, this is the 59th session. Sundays have always been something to look forward to, Sunday afternoons, because it's the day when ELTAI comes forth again with yet another session where an expert comes in, and a lot of learning has happened in the last couple of months. And to be given an opportunity to share here with all of you my own experiences, interesting concept over here, and I am happy to be able to share it with you this afternoon. With you teachers out there, you just might find this concept a very useful one. So looking at designing your curriculum in reverse gear is something that we are looking at. It is a concept which was designed by Grant Wiggins and J. McTighe in 1998. Okay, so they published this book for the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Design. And as part of the book, I mean, you would get to see how very interestingly they have presented the way in which we plan our instructions. So what I have put together for today's session is a close look at the instructional cycle, and to understand what the role of the instructional cycle is with respect to your and our professional development, our CPD. And then we will also be looking at how to sequence the backwards planning structure. We will put it against a framework. And then we will need to look at the relationship between among these three components, the expected learning outcomes that we put together in a lesson plan, the lesson transactions, what all happens in the classroom, and the assessment. So how the three relate to each other, that's something we will analyze. And we will look closely at the learning objectives, assessments, and interventions and identify them. We will understand how assessment happens in backward plans, and finally also look at the structure, the entire structure of the backward plan. So that's what I have in mind for today. So to begin with, let me turn on my chat and let me see you responding to this question. Have you achieved something you have planned? So do you remember achieving something really, really significant in the last, say, 2 years that we have been, confined to our homes? Have we achieved something? So can I see something on the chat box from you? And meanwhile, look at that lovely little definition I've put together, the picture of the staircase leading up, and you see your dream, which translates to a goal, which translates to a plan. There's a lovely definition there. So something from you, yes. So I see a couple of yeses coming in. So do tell me, did you achieve something which you had planned? Yes. So Sonali, something from you. You say yes. So can I have some response? Preeta, all the yeses that are coming in. So give me something more specific. What is it that you achieved that you had initially planned? Anything? So we need a quick turnaround time, okay, because time is very, very limited. Somebody said, I completed a book. So kudos to you. Wonderful to be able to complete a book. Online learning, there's a lot of online learning happening, no doubt. So I hope you had planned something specific and you were able to achieve them, in target time. You became more comfortable technology-wise. You finished your PhD, Ritu, wonderful. Lovely. So Archana got a job. So congratulations to you too. So as you can see, yes, some of you got into a PhD program and presented papers. All right, you have written articles. So you people are on track on your CPD journeys. And it's good to see that you do have a specific plan in mind, a goal put in place, and you are out there trying to achieve your targets. Now, if we look at our CPD framework, you would see that there is this particular framework for us teachers as teaching professionals, which has been put together for us by the British Council. And here, if you look at the concentric circles, you move from an outer stage where there is awareness, where you just about are aware of what you need to do. And as you move on, you understand better, you engage with your gleanings from your experiences, and then you are able to integrate them into your teaching learning system, and finally you qualify as one of the best in the classroom. Okay, so these are the areas, these are the 12 areas in which we are expected to build our competences as teachers, right? So if you look carefully at these particular specific areas, you will see planning lessons and courses is definitely one of the areas in which we need to build our skill sets, understand learners, managing the lesson, etc., etc. Knowing the subject, yes, but as far as we are concerned today, we are focusing more on how we need to be planning our lessons and courses. That definitely is one of the primary areas that I shall be talking about today. All right. So the rest of them do follow. So I'm sure you are familiar with this framework. But since we are focusing more on one particular area, let's look at just this. Okay. If we look at Danielson's framework for professional practice, which you and I are doing, right, you will see that the entire practice is classified under 4 different quadrants. All right, so domain 1 is primarily about planning and prepping. Okay, so planning and preparing the instructional cycle that we deliver to our learners is what comes under domain 1. Domain 2 is the classroom environment. It has its own specifics. If we go to domain 3, it's about what happens in the classroom, the instructions, the execution of what we have planned. That's what domain 3 is about. And domain 4 is how we take it upon ourselves to grow. All right. So that is the professional responsibility. We need to reflect on our teaching. We need to keep a record of what we are doing. We need to participate in professional communities, which is what we are doing at this point of time. So these are the 4 domains, but right now, this is where we are focused, okay? So we need to set our instructional outcomes, most importantly, as professional service deliverers, shall I say. We need to be looking at how we design our instructions. So if you look at the instructional roles of the teacher in the classroom, there are 3 main areas where we operate. We prepare. First, we prepare, and then we deliver the instruction. We get into the practice of teaching, which entails all of these. All right, so where we present the stimulus, we provide the learning intervention and the scaffolding and the guiding, whatever you want to call it, and then we need to elicit and see how well they perform based on the intervention that we've given, and finally we provide the feedback. So this is what comes under the actual classroom transaction, right? And then comes the 3rd stage, where we are talking about assessing how our learners have performed based on what we have given them, assessing the performance, and finally also to check to see whether transference is happening. Okay, are they able to transfer what you shared with them out in the real world? But look at the yellow tab here, the prepping stage. This is what we are concerned with today, informing the learners of objectives. Okay, so this is where I am going to be focusing on for today. All right, now if you look at these little bubbles over here, they talk about an individual teacher's response to planning the objectives in a lesson plan. So how comfortable are you planning objectives or, focusing on the objectives of your lesson? So there are 7 bubbles out there. Can you tell me which is the bubble or which are the bubbles you resonate with? Okay, so they have numbers, so you can just type in the numbers there. So tell me which are the ones which you are able to relate to. We are talking about objectives, identifying objectives in the lesson. 2, Jagriti says 2. All right. Sandhya says, okay, so there's no 12 there. We just about have till 7. Okay, 7s and 2s. So 7 is interesting, because you want to put in the learning objectives because you want to put into practice what you did in your training sessions. Wonderful. All right. So 2 is what most of you are going with. You feel confident if your learning outcomes are specifically stated. Some of you 7. 5. I have some 5s too. Because you like the stating learning outcomes because they give you control over what happens in class. Yes, that's what a framework does. It helps you to stay within a specific perimeter, right? That's important. So thank you for your wonderful inputs. So we will get into what we were specifically talking about, U by D, which is understanding by design framework, which is what Wiggins and McTighe started rolling, and we have picked it up and we quite like the idea. So when can you say you have really understood something? Something has been understood by you. When do you say you have understood something? It's easy for us to say, understood, children, and everybody gives a nod and a smile, and you cannot take it for granted. There is nothing to tell you really whether they've understood. So tell me, when do you say you have understood something, quote unquote? When you are able to make somebody else. Yes, Atyasha Saha Shaha. I love that. Yes, when I'm able to make sure that somebody else is able to understand from me. Great. Anybody else? Yes. When the concept is understood by the learner, I hope. When I'm able to receive positive feedback, Ritu, yes. When you are able to apply, Joyita, that is so correct. When you are able to transfer what you have learned and share it with somebody, when you receive feedback, when they are able to deliver, application, the basic concept, how do you take it forward, and when do you know your learners have understood? Okay, so let's see what we have here. So understanding really is revealed when students autonomously make sense of and transfer their learning through an authentic performance. So you're absolutely correct there when you say, where I need to see some kind of performance or an application. Wonderful. And remember, there are 6 facets to understanding. Okay, if you want to look at the indices or the indicators of how internalization happens, there are a bunch of these things which you need to remember. The capacity to explain, one of you mentioned that, the capacity to interpret, apply, to shift. Okay, so you should be able to transfer yourself from here to there and see that your position is still strong. You are still comfortable when you're able to explain. You are able to have multiple perspectives, empathize, and you are also able to self-assess. So if you are able to do these, I understand that you have understood. All right. So what then is UBD? Okay, so that's the acronym that has gained a lot of popularity. So UBD is understanding by design, which is what Wiggins and McTighe had initially said. They are really talking about deep learning, and there is a way in which you can make this deep learning happen according to them. So we are exploring how this can be taken to our classrooms. All right. So what is understanding by design? UBD. It's an educational planning approach. All right, and the more and more we get embroiled in these confusing times, it's becoming more and more evident that our learners' learning has to be objective-based and outcome-based. All right, so if your planning is, flawed, the outcome is likely to be flawed as well. So the practice of looking at outcomes in order to design, okay, if you want to design curriculum units, your performance assessments and classroom instruction, the approach you take is what we are looking at, focuses on teaching to achieve understanding. So this is the ultimate, outcome of the UBD, okay, the framework that we are looking at. So we are looking at how these are going to be designed. So it's basically a framework for improving student achievement, student and school performance, which is what we are gunning at, and gaining achievement through regular reviews of the results. So these are short-term cycles within which you will be looking at what are the outcomes that we are getting from what we are delivering. And it's followed by targeted adjustments. You keep tweaking your curriculum here and there to see whether there is some change that you need to make to the curriculum or the instruction, not right at the end of the process, but as you go along. So that does become the UBD. Yes, when fundamentals are planned. So fundamentals here, Professor Prakash Chandra Chaudhary, you are right there when you say that it is how you are structuring the whole thing. So if you look at the backward design approach to your plan, to what you're going to be delivering in the classroom, it's what you do in the reverse gear. Did you notice the picture I had here? This lady, she's driving on the back gear. All right, so we are also moving in the back gear. So we start with the goal and we teach toward the end point. So that is the backward design. So you begin by designing effective learning objectives. That's the most important thing here. So first your objectives, then not the activities. You don't design the activities, you design the assessments based on what you want to target. So if this is your target, this is what you design next, your assessment, how you're going to test whether those targets have been achieved. And then accordingly, you design your activities. What am I going to take to my classroom? All right. So that comes third. So the backward design, therefore, it begins by identifying the desired result. Where do I want my learner to reach? Then you talk about how do I achieve and accept, how do I go about getting some acceptable evidence, all right? So which means I need to put these learners to test or some kind of performance testing to see that they're able to produce some results so that I get acceptable evidence. And finally, I plan how to design my activities. What kind of interventions will I take to my children? What kind of experiences? What kind of instructions? So that is what makes it a backward design. All right. So you begin with the objectives, then you design the assessment, how you plan to assess and achieve. You plan to check whether the objectives have been achieved, and finally your interventions. So it focuses on what the learners need to learn, what data has to be collected. See, the data collection is the second step, all right, the assessment part, and how to ensure the students will learn, plans out assessments, and finally you make the lesson plan. So the lesson plan comes actually at the end. So if you look at the instructional cycle, what are we really talking about? We are talking about a defined structure. So far we have covered the framework, which is a structure that promotes effectiveness. How? By collaboration and collective responsibility. Okay, so there are people, there are parties working together. Who are the parties? It's the teacher and the learner. And they set up structures for short-term cycles. Remember, I told you, you do a little, you check to see how much you have achieved, how far you have gone to achieving your objectives. Okay, so the short-term cycles of improvement is what characterizes UBD. All right, so you begin by establishing your learning goals, From there, you move on to deciding what your criteria for assessment is. This is where the difference lies, okay? You don't design the activities right after your objectives. You design on the, you agree on the criteria on which you are going to evaluate your learner performance. And then you plan and execute the learning interventions. What am I going to take to my class, okay? What is the approach that I'm going to use in my class? And then when they end up producing something, you assess the evidence. You check to see what evidence you have of how far they have come regarding this. And then you use this evidence to tweak. Remember, we said they are short-term cycles. You keep tweaking, you keep adapting, you keep looking back at your curricular design to see, hey, how far have I achieved what I was planning to achieve? So this is how the instructional cycle goes about working itself out. So there are three very specific stages, okay, to the instructional cycle, if you look at it. So there is something that happens before the class, which is what you and I are talking about right now. Then there's something which happens during the class where you share the lesson plan, you execute the lesson plan, and then after the class, you reflect on what worked and what didn't work, what you should have done differently, etc., etc. But we are concerned with this stage where we plan the specific learning activities, assessments, and the sequence of the lesson. And more importantly, we identify the learning objectives. All right. So this is the focus. The blue tab is where we are looking at this point of time. All right. So if you look at the backwards design framework, Wiggins and McTighe, they mention 4 very, very specific key educational roles. There are knowledge goals, basic skills goals, and then there are understanding goals, and there are long-term transfer goals, okay? But I have mixed them all up for you. You need to tell me what, who knowledge goals refers to, which color. You can put in the color if you want to. If you want to say knowledge goals is pink, basic skills is green, okay? So I want you to write something on the chat box for me to see. Try it out. So how do I identify a knowledge goal, a skills goal, understanding goal, and long-term goal? Quick, let me see some quick responses here. So which one is the knowledge goal? Which color? All right, Rashmi. So knowledge is blue, as you say. What about the skills? Which one is the skills? Skills, color, give me the color of skills. The blue is knowledge goals, where you get factual information. All right, and I've given you some examples there. The skills goal is definitely the pink one. That's right, you're absolutely bang on. And what about the understanding goals? Yes, the understanding goals, they are the bigger goals. Yes, the thematic goals, the big concepts, right? Patriotism, principles, all right, themes. I've given you some examples. And therefore, the long-term transfer is also something which is very critical. It's the capacity to try out something in a different context. So that is your long-term transfer. So when we talk about UBD, we are looking at 4 of these transferences happening, all right? Now, so this is what we were looking at. And I think more or less all of you are on track because you've been able to classify all 4 of those systems, the backward design plan. Now, when you are designing a lesson plan, we are thinking in terms of what subject, what content area, what unit, and what chapter you have, kind of funneled your content into, your syllabic planning into, all right? And you are dealing not only with facts, but also concepts, application, and inquiry. So this is your curricular focus. But if I were to ask you what is really a lesson plan, you need to fit in these 4 very, very important words into these spaces, okay? So tell me, where does, what fits into number 1, what fits into number 2, Which of these words? Anybody trying out there? Developing an instructor's roadmap of what students need to learn and how it will be done. The first one is D, good. Designing appropriate, wonderful learning activities. So appropriacy is very important, and strategies to obtain feedback on student learning. Addressing and, what is the word? Addressing and integrating, right? So you should be able to integrate. You just said, some of you mentioned that all of those 4 dimensions that I mentioned, they need to be integrated. Yes, some of you did mention it. And providing specific direction. So all of these words are so very important. So being able to give right direction to your different objectives. So these are the things that make your lesson plan an effective one. So I will not go through this again, but now quickly, just to show you what is the relationship among these 3 very important components in the UBD framework. See, first we spoke about the learning objectives. Be very clear. Every teacher has to be very clear on the learning outcomes. Okay, now since that NEP is so objective driven and so outcome driven, we have to be very, very clear in why we are taking this particular task to class and not that. Okay, so you should be able to find the right rationale why you're choosing this particular outcome. So what is the relationship, therefore, between the outcome, the assessment, and the classroom transaction? Let me just say it, because otherwise I'm going to run out of time. What happens in learning? Learning is basically a change in behavior. Okay, learning is a very purposeful activity, and with learning there will be a change in behavior. At 9 o'clock you may not behave in one particular way, or because you don't know something, but because of what your teacher gives to you, the intervention that she makes possible for you, at 9:30 you become a different person. Your behavior will have changed because you have got some input in the meanwhile. Okay, so learning is therefore a change in behavior, and this behavior change has to be assessed. So therefore you have an assessment to check to see what is that change in behavior that happens as a result of the teacher's intervention. And then this assessment is linked to the classroom transaction, because this is what will provide an opportunity to give you evidence. All right, so the learning intervention that you plan is what is going to give you evidence, which you will assess, which will be mapped to the outcome. So this is how it works in reverse gear. So if you look at what the difference is between an outcome and an objective, therefore a quick look at this. What a learner should know, understand, and be able to demonstrate after completion of the process of learning is an outcome. So that is an outcome. The demonstration part is the critical part. Okay, what he's able to show after you have given the instruction. An objective, on the other hand, it's the specific statement of teaching intention. What do I as a teacher intend to do, indicating the specific area that you want to cover and the individual learning activities that I want to give to my learner. Okay, so this is the basic difference, because a lot of teachers I have seen are a little confused regarding what is the difference between outcome and objective. So this is a very clear statement. One is the demonstration on the part of the learner, where he gives evidence, and on the other hand, this is more teacher-centric, because you're thinking in terms of what the teacher has to deliver. So if you look at an example, something which I've taken from English because I am familiar with it. So here is an example. All students, for example, will create a timeline. I expect them to deliver this kind of performance. Okay, so they will create a timeline poster showing simple past and past continuous. Then at tier 2, I will say most students will include an explanation of the simple past and past continuous. At tier 3, I'm going to say some students will identify application of simple past and past continuous. See, there is a clear demarcation. This is a differentiated classroom. Therefore, you will see that some students will be able to identify, some students will be able to give an explanation also, and some students will be able to create a timeline poster. So there is a clear demarcation on the performance levels of the learners. Okay, so this is the outcome that you have mapped for the simple past and past continuous. On the other hand, if you're looking at how you're going to state your objective as a teacher, to summarize and explain the difference between simple past and past continuous. Okay, so this is your objective, whereas this is the outcome that I'm expecting from my learners. So this is the critical difference between the two. So suppose I were to kind of operationalize this, and I would ask you now, how do I go about actually showing it? So if today's objective, today I want to teach my children how to do this. Student will be able to follow simple, concrete commands. So this is the input that this is the objective that I want to plan for today. And what is the activity that I want to plan that will help him to achieve this change in behavior? The activity is the students will run errands within the school, say for instance, get a register from the staff room, get books issued from the library, etc. Okay, so this will be the teaching activity which will serve to get this. Okay, this will be the acquisition on the part of this will be my teaching objective, and what the learner will be able to do would be the outcome. Okay. So these are a cluster of learning objectives which I picked up from a random book. Okay, so if you look at these are the outcomes that a learner is talking about. One learner says, this is a class 3 level book. He says, I am learning to read aloud with expression. Another one says, I'm learning to take turns in discussion, thinking about what the person before me has said. So see, a learner is actually learning how to be very specific of what he wants out of the class. The takeaway becomes so critical, not what you are going to deliver, but what the learner is about to take away. So these are just a cluster of outcomes and objectives that the learner on the learner end, they are trying to figure out. So I just picked up a task like this, where there is an input given, something on the Antarctica, all right, and then the next task which is aligned with this is where you are supposed to segregate information and also prioritize information. So if you look at the goals that were listed by Wiggins, all right, you would probably be able to identify this task and say, well, this is a basic skills goal, okay, because what the learner learns here, the technique he learns to segregate, to classify, to prioritize, he's able to transfer to another place. He'll be able to apply this skill. So this content, therefore, is variable, okay? So it could be a piece from biology or history or geography or whatever. But this is what is important. This task that you give them gives them a particular skill which they are able to transfer, okay? So if they are conversant in handling this today in an English class, they can do it in a geography class. Tomorrow, when he's in a workplace, he'll also be able to segregate information. He'll also be able to prioritize information. So in that sense, they are highly transferable. So I'm going to be quickly showing you how to design objectives. This is a quick way to show you. This is a formula that I find very, very helpful. So do look at it. So this is how you as teachers could write down your objectives. Okay, so make this your formula. If students have learned something, okay, some knowledge or subject or whatever, if they have learned this, then they should be able to do something. Okay, they will be able to do specific action. They will be able to engage in specific action students can do if they know the content. If they know this, they will be able to do specific action here by completing something. This is the evidence. So they will be able to complete the assessment, which will be the proof of knowledge. So 3 components. If they have completed this, that they'll be able to do some action, which will show the assessment of something. Okay, so I'll give you a quick example. if the students have learned what is the knowledge? If they have learned to differentiate between simple past and past continuous tense, then what can they do? What can they do? They can identify two incidents at 2 points of time in the past in a single sentence. So they can identify which is the simple past, which is the past continuous. They'll be able to handle that. All right. And how will I know that? By completing, because they will be able to complete a timeline to show the positions of the two tenses. If I draw a line for them, they'll be able to say, well, here, this is where this action took place. This is where this action took place. All right. So this is the very useful formula which you can take back with you. And there are some components. That very sentence that I showed you, it has some multiple components. So will you quickly try to tell me what these components are? See, I've already mentioned them to ease it out for you. Okay, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 components. Now, if I state the objectives like this, can you tell me which segment, red one, blue one, green one, which one mentions the degree of precision, which one talks about the person, the learner, which one talks about observable action, which one talks about resources? Because if you are a teacher, you are giving some resource, okay, for the child to work on. Which are the conditions that I'm stating? What are the constraints that I'm placing? What is the time constraint? All right. So come on, let me see if you can give me, just I've color coded them for you so that it's easier for you to write. All right. So now you tell me, by the end of the lesson, which component is that? By the end of the lesson. The brown color, that's the subject. Okay, the learners, they are the subject. All right, that's B. All right. The degree of precision, correctly. All right. Okay, I can see some interesting inputs. So which one is green? Which one is time? Time constraint. By when? 2 to 3 minutes. All right. So that is also part of the objective setting. Which is the observable action? Can you tell me which is the observable action that I expect to see? C. All right. So I think I'm getting some interesting responses there. I'll quickly show you the responses. I'm a bit of a killjoy here because time is so very limited. But as you can see, this part by the end of the lesson is the by when factor. This is the learner segment. We'll be able to sequence. This is the action I hope to see. They will be able to sequence. So this is basically what I've asked them to do is a whole bunch of adjectives. You need to position them according to the rule you have learned. All right. So that is what I'm training them to do. So they will be able to sequence the adjectives correctly, the word order of the adjectives. So what is the condition that I'm looking at? What is the opportunity that I gave them? The word order of the adjectives. What was the resource? It was the descriptive sentence in which I had put in a whole bunch of those adjectives in a mixed up order and they had to sequence it correctly. So, and the degree of precision is this word, okay, correctly. So see the formula that I gave you, therefore it encompasses all of these components. So when you write out, if you're expected to, design an academic calendar with a lesson, with all the lesson plans, make sure that, your learning objectives are very, very clearly stated. And this is one formula that should really help you. And finally, I'm going to show you also, I'm sorry, this screen is very, very tiny over here. If you can find a way of magnifying it later on. This is the template that UBD looks at. Okay, it's a wonderful template where they look at stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 of a lesson plan in the backward design framework, where you don't begin with the course book, the textbook, and you don't begin with an activity. The activity here is right at the bottom. Okay, the learning plan is right at the bottom. Right on top, you have the desired result. That is what you're focusing on. The desired result is what you will be able to transfer. What you learn here is what you use there. Okay, so the transferability is what comes first. And then the meaning making, UBD, the understanding by design. So the meaning part is very important. The meaning part is divided into two segments. One is what you have understood. Part two is where you are designing the essential questions. Teach your children how to design questions, the essential question, EQ, very important. And then the third part of this part one is acquisition, which means you are now talking about knowledge and skills. What is it that the child will learn knowledge wise, and what will they pick up as a skill? Okay, so these two segments come under acquisition. So if this is part one, this is part two. All right, so this is part two, where you talk about performance, big time performance, where I ask them to do a project or a big idea, something they work together collaboratively. And other evidence, you might give a pen and paper test, you might give some quizzes. All right, so those would be the other evidences that you would have. So I give you a concrete example here. Say for instance, you were doing a note-taking class, you were teaching your children how to take notes from reading material. That's the competence that you want to give them. All right, so see, I have mapped it to this template. So you have the goals, okay, the basic goals, the essential questions that they'll be able to answer, what would be the objectives, knowledge objectives and skills objectives. All right, so these would be what they will take with them. Okay, summarize content, identify key ideas, supporting ideas, use a hierarchical structure, summarize content. So these would be it. And then you push them onto the assessment. Remember, we are going on reverse gear. It's not activities, it's the assessment. So what assessment do you plan if you want to execute these objectives? Performance tasks and other evidence. Here I have some gap filling tasks. Here I have some long-term tasks. They will actually read the annual function report, they'll take notes, etc., etc. And the learning plan is the activities. This third stage is the activities, where I will actually give them a Cornell note format, and then we will brainstorm, we will do some labeling, we will discuss the samples, and we will make some presentations. So these are my classroom activities. So this comes right at the end, mind you. This is where I have planned my assessment. This is where I am planning my learning outcomes and my objectives, which I just showed you how to do. All right. So this is the basic structure of UBD. You can always look it up. This is there on Google. And the second component is the assessments. We know that we use assessments for multiple purposes. Diagnosis is one of them. Feedback on progress is what we are concerned with right here. All right. So more than diagnosis, it is feedback on the progression. And there are the whole bunch of the other reasons why we do assessments: maintain standards, certify achievement, facilitate progression, etc., etc. But we are concerned here with this, okay? Identify strengths and areas of development, reinforce learning, motivate, and of course a little bit of this also to diagnose where they are, where they need more support. So this is where assessment comes in. I will not really get into a lot of details. We know here that we are talking about criteria referenced assessment of our learners, where we expect the learners. Remember, we said there's a behavior change with every little bit of learning that happens. Okay, so our little learners, they'll move up this pink ladder. Okay, so at developmental level 1, they'll be right here, but as they move on to 4, they move up this ladder, the behavior will become more and more advanced, and the competency will get better and better, and they will move towards mastery. All right, so this is the criterion referenced interpretation of assessment. So when we talk about assessment here, it's about behavior, it's about the change in behavior, what is the intervention that I gave, what is the criteria of how I will assess, what will be the accuracy, how many responses do they take in order to show how well they perform, and what is the time frame within which they show that mastery. All right, so that is the second component, the assessment component. We have the rubrics. I am sure you're absolutely familiar with the rubrics, so I'm not going to spend more time on this. When you get a chance to look at the recording, do take a look at how it's graded. Okay, they are scaled on a 10-point scale. There are these parameters, these dimensions against which performance is measured. All right, so take a good look at that. And the third component, remember, was the learning activities. This doesn't come here, just remember that. This comes right at the end because we are going on reverse gear. All right. So the learning activity, therefore, we know that it has to be meaningful. So please do align your activities to your objectives, your stated objectives. And you should be able to see observable behavior. Whatever performance they do, they should be, they should be authentic stuff that they should be able to perform. And finally, it should be transferable. So students should be able to assimilate from engagement and use it in a different context. Because you did mention it has to have application, otherwise it doesn't make sense. All right. So the last stage, when you are doing the activity, remember there are these questions you have to, consider. What will I explain during the topic? How do I illustrate? How will I engage my learners? Okay. More so in online, in virtual teaching. What are some of the relevant lifelike examples, analogies, situations, scenarios, etc.? And what will students need to do to understand the topic better? So that happens when you are at the execution stage. All right. And remember, this is the release. You slowly release responsibility. Okay. Your responsibility goes, and you let the learner become independent because you have given him exposure to the collaborative mode of working. So this is the gradual release. First I do it, we do it, you all do it, but that you do it alone. All right. So this is how the gradual release of responsibility happens. So I'm going to wrap up by showing you a quick 9-step procedure. So once your the curriculum design is ready, if you have used the UBD because you've been sufficiently impressed by it, try out the UBD. But after you're done with it, you can move on to the 9-step event of instruction, which is the Robert Garnier's 9-step instruction, which is fascinating. All right. So there are a bunch of them. I'm sorry, I missed out the number 9 one. It's called practice. Okay. There's another one called practice. So here you begin by gaining attention. All right. The first one is gaining attention. So who can tell me what this is? So which one is this? By looking at the icon. Yeah, I can see you there. So I'm going to wrap up quickly. Okay. So I would have loved to have seen you doing this, but then since there's no time, the 9 steps, once your objectives are in place, are these. Okay, so take a quick look at these. So the first thing, remember, you do plan your objectives. All right. Then come the 9 of these, one after another, till you transfer the learning onto the next stage. So with that, I'm going to wrap up my session, and I'm going to be inviting questions from you in case something stuck with you.
Thank you, ma'am. The backwards design instructional framework. It's a big picture. In this webinar, the principles for effective curriculum planning, lesson design, and quality assessment highlighted actually the orientation towards transferring the traditional planning to backward planning in a classroom environment. We usually follow a lecture, an activity or a discussion, and a unit test in any classroom. But let's start with an assessment containing high standard rubric that you have already showed us, then structure our lesson for improving the standards of the learners. Thank you for a wonderful and a fruitful session. We have some questions from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
One question is how to get the desired learning outcomes during an online class where a new teacher is not aware of the student's approach.
Yes. So I do believe that it's very important for a teacher to know the basic pedagogy of, why you are doing a particular thing. Because often I've seen teachers in a classroom, you ask them, why did you, what did you have in mind? What do you plan to, give to your learners? They think in terms of the activity for its own sake, activity for doing the activity, or, covering a portion of the syllabus. But there has to be a very clear rationale behind why you want to choose this particular activity. And therefore, I would suggest that even if it's a new teacher, help the teacher understand that there is a competence it's not that specific task. It is the skill that you acquire. It's the knowledge and the skill that you acquire from doing that task that is more valuable. And it is something which is doable in the online mode also. Pick the right tools, whatever platform you use, see which third-party tools will, align itself, which you can use. So, there are an ample, huge plethora of tools and applications which you can use today. But even the basic platform does has a lot of affordances regarding what you can do. The basic pedagogy has to be fused with the platform features to carry it forward.
Okay. One more question. Is the backward design framework suitable for all kinds of educational levels? Like, for example, whether it is primary level or a higher level classes?
Yes, I do believe, because if you don't set out the objective right at the beginning, you are actually lost. You don't know what you want to achieve by the end of the lesson, whether it's at the tertiary level, high secondary level, primary level. You have to be driven by your objectives, right?
Yeah. Yes. So what should be the testing techniques for backward design? Like, do you design specifically?
So actually, today I didn't get enough time to focus on the assessment part, because I was focusing more on how to design the objective. If you look carefully at one of the screens that I showed you, where I showed you the template, okay, so over there are two kinds of performances that get assessed. So basically, it could be a summative test or a formative test, where you're assessing the process, because these are short-term cyclical processes which you are assessing, so that you can feed forward into the learning system. Something that is not going so right, you work on that, tweak it, so that when you move on to the next stage, it has been adapted, it has been modified. So basically, there are performance tests, which are like say, for instance, a project which you might do, an entire task where people are doing things collaboratively or cooperatively. All right. So you are assessing the different skill sets they are bringing to the task. So that is one way. So it could be writing an entire report, designing an infographic, say, for instance, where 3 people are working together. So that could be one kind of assessment, which is performance-based. All right. On the other hand, you can have something like a real-time, something that you do in the classroom. So you can have a quiz which you design on Mentimeter, since we are talking about assessment. So it's something you can design on Google Doc or MS Forms or whatever, some pen and paper kind of test which you can do digitally also. So it's the same formats you're using that you used to use before, pandemic struck.
Okay. Now we are used to the traditional approach, traditional mode of teaching. And now that because of pandemic, we are prone towards online teaching, and your concept is very naive. Is there any research going on, especially in India, or when it comes to the Indian context, with regards to this backward design framework?
Yes, there is a lot of study going on in this area, but field studies, I'll have to check to see whether there are field studies going on, because the impact is still to be seen in India, but abroad in America, this is very popular. It is indeed very popular, because once the objective gets identified, the skill does, the teachers are choosing tasks to take care of performance assessment. So it's designed in a very aligned fashion. So if you look at the policy, the NEP that we have now, it is so outcome based. Why is it that we are trying to bring in so much of outcome driven learning today?
Yeah.
Because we want our learners to experience experiential learning, activity-based learning. So there used to be activity-based learning, but if a teacher who is teaching is not clear as to why I'm doing this activity, what is the gain, what is the portfolio building that will happen out of this, the whole purpose is lost. You see, even the learner doesn't get to see it.
Yes, yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Sonali Bhattacharya, for bringing the changing tendencies in the teaching and learning approaches. We usually emphasize what students should know, right? Their requirements and how to sequence the teaching process to complete our courses successfully. As teachers, we should also know the learner's needs, the proper delivery of the content, and how the learner practices the learning activities. I hope this session has given us some insights actually into this. This is a ever demanding teaching practice, right? Everything is changing, and this has given a lot of insight to rethink about the new approaches in our teaching processes. Thank you, ma'am.
I got a good question there, which says, is it okay for large classrooms? I think this is, see, if you have objective-driven activities, it's at the planning stage that we are talking about. This whole session that I took today, it's aimed at the instructional planning stage. The execution comes later. That's the next stage of the instructional cycle. So at the planning stage, do please identify your objectives and the outcomes, which will be assessed through actual performances.
Sure. Thank you. So I thank you, ma'am, once again for accepting the invitation. I thank ELTAI for coordinating 59th webinar and organizing another successful event. Appreciations to the whole team. Now, 21st century classroom environment demands hybrid learning techniques. We are dealing with the next generation learners. So hence such topics are the need of the hour. Thank you, audience. Now over to Xavier.
Thank you, Dr. Madhavi, Dr. Lalitha, and Dr. Sonali. I have a couple of announcements for the participants. The first announcement is about the next webinar. Our next webinar will be held on diaspora globalization through the lens of modernism. The speaker is Professor Jaspreet Jain. So please do attend. It's on the next Sunday at 4:30 p.m. And the next announcement is with regard to the certificates. All those who attended the entire session today will receive certificate links by email at 6 p.m. We issue certificates only to the ELTAI members and students. Please do submit your details for your certificates, and your certificates will be processed within a week. And thank you all for your participation. Now we are ending this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Lalitha, Madhavi, and Xavier. Thank you so much.
Welcome.